did. Oh, well, we'll hope that this is all okay. I'm not an expert in these machines, so okay. Let's go on and hope.
So
Somebody should take notes in case this isn't recording properly.
I could record on my cell phone.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
well, if I can just back up a little bit about some of my earlier experiences, because I did serve the church for a number of years before I then decided to go back and pursue psychology. And during those early years, I was very interested in politics as a graduate student, and I ran for Congress 3 times in the 70s, in 76, 78, and then in 80. Lost all 3 times, but I learned a lot. I learned a lot about politics, about developing a campaign and eliciting or soliciting support and so on. But I thought that I would probably not get back into the political world. So I was working at the prison and teaching at Shawnee State, and life was good. And then I decided to take another look at the political opportunities that were available. And I decided to run for Congress again, and while working at the prison. And I was able to do that because I was a contract employee and not a state employee, so I could be involved in politics. So that was in 1992, and I decided to run. I did, and I won with a very slight winning margin. I got 51% of the vote, and I won, and I was a congressman. Now, I had no money when I started running. I had no real political support, and I contacted the psychologists in Washington, the AAP, I guess it's called.
Yeah, the AAP.
And I put in a call, and I got a call back, and they said, "Well, why are you calling us?" And I said, "Because I'm a psychologist." And they said, "You're a psychologist and you're running for Congress?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Well, we're very interested in what we can do to be helpful." And so they put out word across the country, and I started getting these little blue envelopes in the mail with contributions from psychologists, $5, $15, $25. But it was critical support at a critical time. And it enabled me to garner enough financial support to show credibility with leaders in my party in Washington, and then they started helping, and so I was able to mount a reasonable campaign. But I'm not sure that could have happened had it not been for that early support from psychologists around America.
Well, that's great.
Most of them I never knew, never met, but and then I became the first psychologist to serve in the United States House of Representatives. There had been other professional people in the field of mental health, psychiatrists and MDs and social workers and others, but never a psychologist. And I'm happy to say that today that I have been followed by 3 or 4 others, but I was the first and was proud of that. And I'm very thankful to the profession for what the members of the psychology profession did. And let me say something about psychology and politics. I remember as a freshman, I was on the Education and Labor Committee, and we were discussing some bill, and one of my Republican colleagues on that committee, responding to what someone had said about the research or the data shows, and this person spoke up and basically said, we're not interested in that. We're interested in common sense and common sense approaches. Well, I think that's a problem. And I determined, maybe because I'm biased toward my profession, But I determined that the profession that is best positioned to have a positive impact upon the formation and the development of public policy is psychology, the field of psychology. Because we are a research-based profession. We believe in science, we believe in research, we believe in quantitative methods and rigorous research design. And if we're going to solve the problems that are facing the country and the world, I think we need to at least utilize the best information that's available to us, rather than just simply anecdotal information or personal bias. But I see so much of what comes out of Washington, and I'm sure that same thing is true of every level of government. Are things that are based upon some personal experience that some political person has had, that colors their view or their opinion in such a way as, we pursue answers to complex problems that are wrong, unhelpful, and in some cases actually harmful to what needs to be done or what society can benefit from.
Were you able to have any impact on that while you were in Congress? Were you able to find ways to talk to them about the importance of data and information?
Well, I tried to do that, and I would not hold myself out as the only member of the United States Congress that is concerned about, a rigorous approach to problem solving that goes beyond personal bias and opinion. But it is, in a body like that, it's rather difficult because people are individually elected to their offices, members of the House of Representatives as well as the senators, and I think they sometimes, unfortunately, feel as if because they've been elected, their ideas should not be subjected to the same kind of scrutiny that would be beneficial or even necessary. But I was able to do some of the things in the Congress that I think was helpful. I introduced. You may find this interesting because I introduced the first bill in the House of Representatives dealing with mental health courts. And it was a fairly modest grant program to provide grant resources to communities that wanted to establish mental health courts. Drug courts had already sort of been accepted in many places as a helpful approach to dealing with folks who had those kind of substance abuse programs, but to my knowledge, there were no real effective programs, save in Seattle, Washington. There was a program, and one other place that I became aware of, but it was very rare for communities or jurisdictions to have mental health courts. So I introduced this legislation, and then Senator Mike DeWine, I was talking with him later, and he said, I looked at this legislation that you've introduced, and I'm interested in it because when I was a county prosecutor, I saw the problem in dealing with people with serious mental disorders within the criminal justice system. And I said, Senator, that would be really wonderful if if you would introduce a companion bill in the Senate. And he said, I can't tell you that I'll do that, but I will promise you that I'll really consider it. And as it ended up, he did. In fact, he took my bill and I think he doubled it. And I was very happy about that. And he got it passed in the Senate. And I could not get it passed through the House of Representatives. And there was a guy named Bill McCollum, who was a representative from Florida, who was chair of the Judiciary Committee. And he was holding it up. He would not let it be acted upon in the House. And we were coming toward the end of the legislative session. And I called Senator DeWine and I said, Senator, do you know Bill McCollum? And he said, of course, we served together in the House when I was in the House. And I said, he will not let this legislation move. You got it passed in the Senate. And I said, and Bill McCollum was then leaving the House to run for the Senate, I believe, in Florida. And I said, Senator, do you think if I gave my bill to Representative McCollum, if I let him put his name on it and remove mine, that that he would let it move? And the senator said, I don't know, but I'll talk with him. And he did, and McCollum was willing to take my bill as his own. And
so you never got credit?
I never got credit in terms of the
okay.
My name on the legislation, but I know how it came about. And I think Senator DeWine, then Senator DeWine, knew as well, and people within the the mental health community knew. But but that's how some things get done in Washington.
Right.
But that's just an example of how I think my my background and my history working with people with psychiatric disorders, mental disorders, led to legislation that I was proud of and I think was very helpful.
Well, and also you weren't so intent on getting your name on it. So you just wanted to get
I wanted
it accomplished.
Result.
Yeah.
I wanted the result.
And so many people are just stuck on getting their own name out there.
That sort of thing happens a lot. I was also the first person that introduced legislation dealing with the people who had been injured by working in our nuclear facility. My focused interest was the nuclear facility in southern Ohio, where people had worked in these environments where they had been exposed to dangerous toxins and had many of them died, developed cancers and so on. And my friend Bill Richardson, who at that time was the Secretary of Energy, had been a congressman with me, and President Clinton had appointed him Secretary of Energy. I convinced Bill to for the very first time to acknowledge that people had been injured as a result of negligent behavior on the part of our government. And so I introduced the legislation in the House, and to his credit, Senator Voinovich picked it up in the Senate, and we ended up with legislation that has impacted hundreds, even thousands of people. Those who were affected have received lifetime medical care for conditions related to that exposure. Those that have already passed, their widows or their children have received compensation, I think, in the amount of $150,000. And that's an ongoing program. People are still benefiting from that program.
Well, it sounds like in a couple of instances you work together with people of the other party from your own, and that's admirable.
Well, you have to get,
to get things done.
Result.
Yes. Well, I worry about the current government because they don't seem to be able to get anything done.
Well, quite frankly, I think there are many in government today, unfortunately, who really see no legitimate role for government other than, military, to protect us from foreign threat, and maybe police activity here at home, and so they are, unfortunately, they're willing, in my judgment, having observed this, to see government fail, because they don't really believe that, at least the federal government especially, has any legitimate role in many of these areas, such as education or environmental protection or a whole range of things.
Okay, so eventually you got out of the Congress. Let's see, how many terms did you serve?
I was there 12 years, 6 terms.
12 years. Okay.
I was elected in '92 to defeated in '94, re-elected in '96. And can I talk about something that's related to psychology that that was used as a really nasty political weapon against me?
Oh, okay.
When I was in Congress, there was a study that was published by a very reputable psychology journal. In fact, it may have been the oldest psychology journal, about sexual abuse and the ability of people to overcome sexual abuse and to go ahead and live, healthy, normal lives. And the so-called Dr. Laura, who
Right.
Sort of presented herself as a psychologist. I think she wasn't, and that makes me happy. But she started talking about this study because she accused the study. It was a meta-analysis of a number of studies. She accused this study and this journal of promoting loose attitudes toward the sexual abuse of children. And then Majority Leader in the House, Tom DeLay from Texas, took it up, and he started talking about it on the floor of the House, and the result was a resolution was introduced in the House to condemn this study.
Yes, I remember something about that.
And the resolution had a lot of good things in it because it said things like, we stand against the abuse of children and for the protection of children, and there was a lot of good sentiments and good statements in it. But there were parts of the resolution that I found very offensive as a psychologist, and quite frankly as a person who had been in the ministry, because there was a phrase in there that said, and I don't have the words exact, but said, that children who are abused as children are unable to develop healthy, normal, intimate sexual relationships. And I didn't believe that.
Right.
And so by this time there was a second psychologist in the Congress, Brian Baird from Washington State, and I read the study. So Brian and I talked, and we thought, what are we going to do here? Because this is going to be brought to the floor, so there were parts of the resolution that I agreed with, part of the resolution I disagreed with. And I almost never voted present when I was in the House. In the 12 years I was there, I voted present 5 times. And I know exactly why I voted present instead of either yes or no for all those 5 times. And this was one of the times when I voted present because I didn't want to agree with the resolution as it was, and I didn't want to disagree with the resolution because there were parts in there that were very good, so I voted present to register the fact that I was on the job. But Brian Baird also, and I think 3 others, voted present. Within 24 hours, there were news releases going out all over my congressional district accusing me of supporting child sexual abuse. And for years, and through multiple campaigns, including my campaign for governor, I had to deal with that accusation.
Right.
And I'm sure there were members that went to the floor that day and voted for that resolution without ever having thought about it, what they were voting for. But as a psychologist, I could not say yes to something that I thought was so egregious in terms of its view of the ability of the human being
to recover from anything,
to overcome diversity.
Right.
And one of the things that I said at the time was that if a child has cancer and is treated and recovers and goes on to live a healthy life, we celebrate that. We should do the same thing with children who have been sexually abused or in other ways physically abused and overcome it. it shows the magnificence of the human spirit and the human ability to grow and to recover and to heal. But it seems as if the right wing wants to have nothing to do with anything that implies that sexuality can be anything but a, but a negative in a human life.
Wow. Okay, so anyway, they brought this up when you ran for governor. Did you run for governor right away after you stopped being in Congress? I can't recall.
I ran for governor while I was still a member of Congress.
Okay.
And I'll tell you how that happened. I never thought of running for the governor's office or for the Senate. And one day I got a call from Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid from Nevada, and he said, would you come over to my office? I'd like to talk with you. And quite frankly, unfortunately, there's not a lot of interaction between the House and the Senate sometimes. The House is more casual, relaxed, less formal, and the Senate's a little more rigid and austere. So I said, sure. So I went over to Senator Reid's office. When I got there, he had 3 other senators with him. Senator Schumer from New York, Senator Stabenow from Michigan, and Senator Durbin from Illinois. And Senator Reid said, well, we called you over here because we think you would be the right person to run for the United States Senate from Ohio. And I said, well, that's flattering, but I hadn't thought about it. Would you do some polling for me to see what it looks like? And so they did a poll, and it looked pretty encouraging. And so I thought about it for quite some time. And then my chief of staff said to me one day, he said, Ted, if you're prepared to leave the House and run for the Senate, why don't you think of running for governor? He said, I've worked in the Senate, and a governor can do a whole lot more than a senator in terms of making decisions and actually, moving things forward. The legislative process in Washington can be very slow and laborious, and oftentimes, you can work a long time and end up with no result. So I thought about it, and I thought, okay, I'm going to run for governor. So I called Senator Reid, and I said, Senator Reid, I'm not going to run for the Senate. I've decided to run for the governor's office instead. And he said something to me that I thought I just really appreciated. He said, well, Ted, I wish you were running for the Senate, but I'm glad you're not staying in the House. He said, this country's in trouble, and we need people willing to take risks to make it better. And so I'm glad you're taking your risk here. And it was a risk, because I've worked hard to get to the House, and there was no guarantee I would be elected if I ran for governor. But I was, and served 4 terms.
So how long were you governor?
4 years.
4 years, okay.
1 term.
Yeah, okay. And then, and now I hear that you've decided not to rerun. Is that true?
No, it was a tough decision because, I was governor during a very difficult period of time. The greatest recession since the Great Depression.
Yeah.
And a lot of job loss, a lot of pain and misery, and a lot of tough decisions regarding how to do what you're required to do as governor, and that's maintain a balanced budget, while at the same time trying to use the resources that you do have, the diminishing resources that you have, in the most reasonable way to meet the most human need and to keep the state in a steady position. And I think I did that. I wasn't a perfect governor, wasn't a perfect psychologist, but I do think. Well, I do think though that during a very, very difficult time, the state of Ohio was able to keep from sinking much deeper than I think it would have sunk had it not been for our administration and the wonderful people that I had helping me administer this state. And President Obama and the stimulus resources that we got were hugely helpful in enabling us to keep things steady until they were able to start to improve. And quite frankly, the economy started turning around during my last year in office. Unemployment went down 1.6% during my last year in office, and an additional 1.7% during my successor's first year and a half in office. So the recovery was underway, but people weren't feeling it.
Right.
And so, I ended up losing the election. But I was glad that I was there during those 4 years, even though they were very tough years, because I think they were important years in trying to keep the state in a steady position, to invest in the things that were of greatest importance. And
what do you think was the greatest accomplishment? What did you see happening that is continuing maybe? And
well, some things happened that aren't continuing, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, okay.
The thing that I think was most significant, could have been most significant long-term, was what we did with education reform.
Right.
Because Ohio had labored under an unconstitutional system of school funding for many, many years. There have been 4 Supreme Court decisions saying it was unconstitutional. And I think we really took that on and dealt with it in a way that gave us a constitutional system. And we did that through a complicated process. But I held 13, 15 public forums all across the state. They were about an hour and a half to 2 hours in length, listening to people. And so we developed what we called the evidence-based model. We tried to take research, as I referred to earlier. We tried to take the best research that was available to us regarding teaching and learning, and we committed our state to funding a system that would enable that evidence-based model to be implemented. We couldn't do it all during the recession, but we changed the funding formula so that the areas of the state where there was the greatest financial need would get more state assistance. And during those 4 years, we moved state funding for K through 12 education from about 40% coming from the state up to about 52%. And if our model had remained in place, that percentage coming from the state would have continued to escalate, which is what the court said needed to happen. We needed to have less reliance on the local property tax.
Right.
That inevitably leads to disparity between wealthy communities and poor communities. Education Week said it was the boldest, most creative education reform in America. But unfortunately, most of that has been dismantled now by the current administration. In fact, we're going back the other way. The most recent funding formula that was put out, wealthy districts are getting more and poor districts are getting
less,
the same or less. Yeah. So, but I still think that elements of that model are still there, and I hope that someday Ohio can return to a commitment to having a constitutional system of school funding, and that all of our kids will have an equal chance. The other thing that we did that I think is still in place, and I hope will remain in place, is we passed an energy reform bill that has a renewable portfolio standard in place, so that 25% of all the electricity sold in Ohio will have to be from renewable resources or advanced technologies. And that has resulted in a lot of investments being made in wind power and solar power and other kinds of alternative energy resources. And I think the current administration would very much like to get rid of the standard, but I don't think they can, because even some of the major leaders in the business community have come to see its worth and are benefiting from it.
Well, that's good.
So,
Yeah.
so there are some things that are of
Yeah.
lasting consequence.
Yeah. So, you've decided not to run again for governor. I don't know if you want to go into why, but
Sure.
but I
I'll
also
go away.
okay, and I would like to know what you're thinking about for the future, because you're still pretty young and you've got
Yeah.
things to do. So,
Well, I decided after a lot of thought, I decided not to run for governor. I think for probably three primary reasons. One is I did not want to spend the next 2 years raising money. I think I demonstrated I had the capacity to raise money. My campaign was well over $20 million, and then I helped raise an additional $20 million or so for the Democratic Party. So, but it's a chore. It's not something that I find pleasant to do.
right.
So that was an issue. The second issue was I wanted this campaign, the 2014 campaign, to be a campaign about the future and not the past. And I felt that if I was the candidate, there would be an effort on the part of my opponent, the current governor, to just rehash the past. And I saw no real benefit in that. I think this governor, I'm going to be very candid, is not a good governor and not leading the state in the right direction, and I want him to be defeated in 2014, and we'll work hard to try to see that that happens. And so I thought, a new person, without having the baggage of governing during a deep recession, could focus more on the future, and that would be helpful in actually winning. And the third reason is that I want to do some other things, that I haven't done before. I think it was a psychologist by the name of Thomas that said that one of the basic human needs is for new experiences. Well, that's true of me, I think. And so I'm doing some new things now, and we'll hope to do some new things in the future. After I lost, I did a fellowship at the Kennedy School of Government in Cambridge, and I enjoyed that a lot. I'm doing some business stuff with some of my former staff persons. I am looking forward to trying to help Senator Clinton, former Secretary Clinton, become president, the first woman president in 2016. I got a call from Bill Clinton on a Saturday morning about 5-6 weeks ago, and I thought it was the coolest thing because I think he is a magnificent human being, and I think Secretary Clinton is remarkable. Anyway, he called. The phone rang. I said hello. He said, "This is Ted." I said, "Yeah." He said, "This is Bill Clinton." I said, "Mr. President, it's so wonderful to hear from you."
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, I just heard that you weren't running, and I wanted to call and let you know I was thinking about you." He said, "I think you could have won, but it had to be your personal decision." I said, "Well, Mr. President, what I want to do is to go to work as quickly as possible for 2016 because I still want Hillary Clinton to be president." And he said, "Well, I don't know. We'll just." I said, "How's she doing?" He said, "She's doing well." He said, "We went out and had dinner last night. And she's fine." He said, "We'll just have to give her 2 or 3 months to rest up and see what she decides to do." But I believe there's some unfinished business. I believe the country needs to have a woman president. I think that would be a wonderful event, just as having an African American president was a great event. It was good for the country in so many ways. And I think she has incredible abilities and experiences. And so I am, at this point, looking forward to the next 3.5 years to try to do whatever I can to see that Ohio helps Hillary Clinton become president.
Okay. Well, good. So, I wonder if others of you in the room have things you would like to ask.
Let me submit this question to you, if you think it's satisfactory.
I could ask it. Okay. And the person speaking right now is Andrew Hinkle. Okay. Let's see here, Ted. I'll read this. What do you see as the future of psychology in the delivery of healthcare services?
Well, that's a critical question for the profession, obviously. As I said, I think psychology is the profession that is most capable of providing answers to a lot of society's problems through our research and understanding of the dynamics of human behaviors and so on. Psychology is so diverse, though. I mean, there's no, you know, when you say someone's a psychologist, that doesn't tell you a whole lot about what they do. I mean, there are psychologists that are devoted specifically to research, and that's great. There's psychologists that are, you know, as my friend Dr. John Corrigan is a neuropsychologist and deals with, you know, issues of traumatic brain injury and the like. Psychologists are involved in teaching. Psychologists are involved in every aspect of life, and I think that's what makes it such an incredibly intriguing profession.
Right, there's so many things you can do with it.
There are so many things, so many directions you can go in, but quite frankly, not every psychologist can do what every other psychologist can do.
Right.
You know, you need to specialize if you're going to go in some of these, delve into some of these areas of service and so on. So, I mean, I think the future of psychology is good and bright, but like every profession, especially professions that deal in the area of health and healthcare, these are tumultuous times, and there are dangers, obviously, in terms of whether or not we're going to be committed as a country to provide the full range of healthcare services, or whether or not we're going to settle for a 2 or 3 tiered system of healthcare, where, you know, if you've got wealth or prestige or access to resources, you get one level of healthcare, and if you're poor and without resources, you are basically deprived of even the most basic health care. And I think psychology can get caught up in and be affected by those decisions as regarding what kind of healthcare system we want. And, you know, as we all know, unfortunately, in the past, behavioral disorders and psychological and psychiatric disorders have oftentimes been treated as of lesser importance or with lesser urgency and so on. Thankfully, I think that is changing now, and I think, you know, as a society, we're becoming more aware of the importance of psychology and psychiatry and clinical social work and you know, these professions that, in my judgment at least, are critical if we're going to have a healthcare system that's what it ought to be. I think the profession needs to continue to be an advocate for itself. I think psychology is often misunderstood. Unfortunately, I think psychology has been trivialized in the minds of a lot of people through these so-called, talk show hosts who
Right.
present themselves as psychologists and are more entertainers than anything else and can be exploitive and I think that's really unfortunate. So I think it's important for psychology as a profession to protect the profession as best it can from that kind of I don't know exactly how to say it, almost profane mockery on the part of some of these folks who would try to portray themselves as a psychologist.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great.
I could name names, but I won't.
Right, you don't need to.
I wonder if we should stop and just check and see how we're at and let people
Okay.
stretch and then